So I'm really looking forward to seeing this video from Invicta. This video is titled The True Size of a Roman Legion 3D. Last time we kind of talked about like the Roman government and structure of their armies was with his Historia Civilis and his Rome series. And it's been about over a year now since we've talked about it, but I definitely want to capture the scale of how big a Roman legion and army would be, because again, if there's anything that Rome was known for, it's its overwhelming manpower and the size of, their forces. So I'm looking forward to seeing in a more visual aspect. Hopefully this video can capture the scale of the Roman army and the legion. So, and help me refresh about, the facts about it. So, before I get started, if you want to watch the original video by Invicta, the link to this video is down in the description down below. And if you want to help support my channel in any way, shape, or form, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It would really help my small but humble channel grow, and I would appreciate it very much. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let us watch True Size of a Roman Legion 3D documentary by Invicta.
The Roman legions are impressive for their historical achievements, but rarely do we stop to properly understand their nature at a fundamental level. How were they organized? What was their leadership structure? How large was their logistics train? What was their frontage in battle? Today, let's explore the true size of a legion of the Roman Empire.
Our team spends a lot of time producing video content.
The foundation for the Roman legion was the legionary. These soldiers were Roman citizens who were drawn from across the general population. Potential recruits had to meet certain criteria and pass a series of tests. According to Vegetius, the ideal candidate was a rural man from a temperate climate who
I'm not sure if I saw this video on here with all of you or I did this on my own. But yeah, I was interested in like the training of like, ancient recruits. And I think the Romans had like a 4-month, was it 4 months? I could be completely wrong. But like 4 to 5 months of training before they were considered legionaries. And, it was meant to get their foot actually in the door before they became a legion. So they did extensive training before they even got the title. So yeah.
About 6 Roman feet tall. Upon taking their oath and undergoing 4 months of training, they would be ready to join the legions for battle. Whilst in service, each soldier would be assigned to a group of tent mates known as the contubernium. Whilst there is some debate, most academics agree that it consisted of 8 legionaries in addition to 1 to 2 military slaves, 1 to 2 mules depending on supply needs, a millstone, and a standard A-frame tent. It is with this contubernium that a legionary would spend most of his time. This brotherhood was so ironclad that the term contubernalis emerged in the Latin vernacular as a term for camaraderie. When the legion encamped, each contubernium functioned as its own self-sustaining unit. For instance, while the slaves pitched the tent, the younger legionaries might be sent to fetch fodder and firewood for the campsite as others prepared food. Grinding the grain ration, in particular, was a labor-intensive task which occurred every night. This grain was most often used for bread, biscuits, and porridge, which served as the staple for the average legionary's diet that was further supplemented by salted meat, vegetables, cheese, wine, and olive oil. When not performing essential duties, the members of a contubernium would make the most of their off time. This included things like gaming, gambling, and relaxing.
Sorry, I just had the image of gaming them playing actual video games. Sorry, that's so stupid. But you know, I have to like comment on I think that's really cool, the camaraderie origin there. And it makes sense. Like I've often heard like soldiers forming very tight, you know, brotherhoods because you're obviously all risking your lives. You all want to live, and it's easy to kind of build that camaraderie with, you know, fellow men in arms. And yeah, this like little unit, it definitely seems like it would really help that. And I guess like having grade, you know, you know what I think of? I think of like the Sacred Band of Thebes. Like the saying goes that they were like comprised of like gay couples, and so they would fight harder to make sure that, you know, their lover or whatnot wouldn't perish. They were that tightly, you know, close and knit to each other. And I guess that like idea of like you're really close with someone, so not only is your cohesion gonna be great, you know, in a team building way, but you would want to fight with them and really want them to, you know, make it. So I think that mindset is kind of what I'm thinking of. I think it's a really good one to have, you know? You ideally want your soldiers to get along with each other, right? Or I could be wrong, I don't know, but it sounds right to me.
When it came time to move, a contubernium's gear would be efficiently loaded for transport. Each soldier carried roughly 20 kilograms of arms and armor, in addition to their entrenching tools, bedroll, rations, and personal items. The heavier gear, such as the tent, stakes, millstone, and various other items, would be loaded onto the unit's mule. Yet while the contubernium was self-sustaining in a day-to-day sense, it was not a functional military unit that could hold its own in battle. For this purpose, 10 contubernia would be grouped together into a century for a combined total of 80 legionaries, 10 to 20 slaves, 10 to 20 mules, and 11 tents. In keeping with its battlefield role, the century was assigned a series of officers. The centurion was the commanding officer, the optio was his second in command, the tesserarius was third in command and watchman, the signifer was the standard bearer, and the cornicularius was the trumpeter. These men in turn had their own support staff, mules, tents, and other belongings.
Okay.
The officers were critical as the means by which the men of a century were made a part of the Roman legion as a whole. When it came to discipline and training, the commanding centurion and his optio proved integral to maintaining a well-drilled unit through their use of disciplinary staves, the vetus and the hastilae, respectively. When it came to performing duties, the cornicularius helped summon the men for roll call, review, and for the march, while the tesserarius distributed the watchword and managed those on sentry duty. And finally, when it came to fiscal management, the signifer was in charge of a unit's finances, while the cornicularius was in charge of the military clerks. It was these men who tracked a soldier's pay and all of the deductions they had accrued. In this regard, it is estimated that around 2/3 of a legionary's yearly salary went towards food, clothing, and common expenses. On the march, a unit would be led by its centurion, signifer, and cornicularius, while the optio and the tesserarius likely brought up the rear and maintained the order of march. In battle, the same order appears to have been maintained, with the senior commander leading from the front right and his deputies policing the formation. The exact position of the signifer and cornicularius is debated, with some arguing that they were in close proximity to the centurion for ease of command, while others placed them further back for reasons of safety and maintaining combat effectiveness of the front rank. As the Romans of the Republic had found, while a unit of around 100 men could hold its own in battle, its strategic uses were limited. Thus, the cohort was born, as a way to combine 6 centuries into a large group of men who could have a more substantial role on and off the battlefield.
Okay. I'm loving the way he's breaking it down from, the Contubernium into the century, into the cohort, and it just keeps building and building as you get the bigger picture of what a legion is. Oh my goodness. What an effective system. I'm kind of amazed that, the Roman system of war and management was second to none, It really is amazing, just the structures that they created and, how they could create as an effective military as one could at their peak.
In total, a standard cohort had 480 legionaries, 30 officers, 60 to 120 slaves, 60 to 120 mules, and around 66 tents. There are some idiosyncrasies of the cohort that are worth mentioning. The prestigious first cohort of every legion was made of 5 double-strength centuries for a total of 800 legionaries. Typically, these were the veterans of a legion, its iron core, which inspired and offered an example for the more junior soldiers of their fellow cohorts. As such, it was the unique honor of their aquilipher to carry the legionary eagle into battle. This venerated standard represented the soul of the army, being kept in a dedicated shrine at the heart of a legionary camp or fortress. The Augustan reforms standardized the size, number, and positions of the legions across the empire. Therefore, it was actually quite rare to see legions moving around in their entirety outside of major campaigns. Instead, the cohort was the typical operational subgroup which could be dispatched for all manner of duties. For instance, it might be sent out to reinforce key areas, build infrastructure, or to respond quickly to threats. This group was largely self-sustaining, underscored by the presence of cohort camps in archaeological records, which are significantly more common than legionary fortresses. When the need arose, one or more cohorts were grouped together into ad hoc units known as vexilliones, effectively a legion in miniature.
Okay, that makes sense, because the legion, as, we think about it, as we're about to break down, is going to be, basically, much larger. So it's cool to see that the cohort, I don't know why I keep saying cohort, but the cohort kind of being the more mobile, unit that is kind of meant to be utilized the most, it seems, outside of major campaign. So it's good to get, structure about this, because like I said, the last time we covered about the inner workings of the Roman military was with Historia Civilis, over a year ago. So I'm definitely, some of this stuff is starting to come back to me, and it's definitely great to see the visual aspect of how huge some of this stuff would be,
These were the most common strike force in the Roman Empire. Often 2 cohorts would be sent out under a single commander, numbering about 1,000 men, which could effectively solve any problem quickly and efficiently. The largest and most iconic standard Roman force was the legion. It was composed of 10 cohorts with a theoretical paper strength of about 5,120 soldiers.
Wow.
Using the upper end of our prior figures, these would also bring with them about 295 officers, 1,400 slaves, 1,400 mules, and around 660 tents.
Dang, man. And they had multiple legions, the first, the 12, again, the Roman manpower, everything all combined in my head is insane once the scale is now finally being put into my head about how huge some of this stuff would be. Dang.
But a legion had even more elements worth mentioning. For instance, Josephus tells us that during the early Principate, each legion was assigned a cavalry unit, which epigraphic evidence suggests was called the Equites Legionis. Likely, these served as scouts and bodyguards at the direct disposal of the general. They were 120 troopers strong, which were likely broken down into 4 30-man termi. In a parallel structure to the infantry century, each terma had a commanding officer, the decurion, 2 sub-officers, the duplicarius, and the sesquiplicarius, as well as a standard-bearer, the signifer. These riders had 1 to 2 spare horses, while their gear was carried by an estimated 60 mules and drivers, with the cavalrymen themselves being housed within around 15 tents. Furthermore, legions were assigned an artillery corps. Estimates vary, but it is generally accepted that each century had 1 small scorpion for a total of 60, while on major campaigns, each cohort was assigned a medium ballista for a total of 10. Additional siege equipment, such as rams and large onagers, were added as needed, but we have assumed a mix of 5 pieces. Crewing, maintaining, and transporting such gear would have required a substantial siege train. No reliable records exist, but we can approximate the use of at least 15 4-oxen carts laden with the components of the medium to large siege pieces, while the smaller scorpions were carried by a mule from their respective century. Tending to the artillery and all the other engineering needs of a legion would have been the Fabri. These were the members of the engineering corps whose numbers are not defined, but may have been counted at around 10 specialists, 1 per cohort, whose expertise enabled them to supervise the work of general labourers. Another critical group would have been a legion's medical staff. Once more, we have no firm numbers and will therefore assume 10 doctors, 1 per cohort, with an additional 20 assistants, 10 2-horse ambulance carts, and 10 medical tents. And last but not least among the support staff would have been the legion's scribes, which we will estimate at around 15 men with 15 supply mules. While often overlooked, these scribes were key to the institutional integrity of a legion. They maintained the records of the force, which included everything from payrolls to service logs, supply tallies, reconnaissance reports, and more.
Okay.
Beyond this, a legion would have...
I'm just really amazed of just the structure and the efficiency of old armies. Like, antiquity. Like, when we covered the Alexander the Great series by Kings and Generals, I watched a lot of, like, how the Macedonian armies, like, the logistics, the structure. It is amazing just, like, how, you know, humans were like, okay, we have to have an army, and then just all of this just kept piling up until they created just this efficient war machine, I feel like is the best way to put it. With all these different structures, how much man, how much, like, each legion, each cohort, what are their responsibilities, what equipment was they have, like again, just managing all this, like, you know, and, like, in antiquity and, like, back then, it is amazing, just, like, you know, just the structure, the organization, and to create such an efficient, army. I don't know, I just find it so fascinating. I find that aspect the most coolest of everything.
Had all manner of spare parts, food, personal belongings, and other items in need of transport. Without any explicit records, we will assume this would have been carried by around 50 additional mules, for a grand total of approximately 1,600 such animals. That's almost 1 mule for every 5 men in the legion. But the ratio of animal to human rises even higher when you consider the herds of livestock which would have been shuffled along an army as a ready source of food. We will not be modelling these in this particular video. Commanding this behemoth of a force were a series of high-ranking officers. the legionary legate, the camp prefect, 6 tribunes, and additional musicians and standard bearers. These, along with the various sub-officers, formed the all-important hierarchy of a legion. It will now be worth discussing their ranks in greater detail. We will begin with the centurions, of which there were 1 per century, and thus about 60 per legion. But not all were created equal. A strict ranking system was in place, which had its roots in the traditions of the manipular armies from the Republic. In order of highest to lowest rank, this resulted in the following centurion titles: the Pilus Prior and the Pilus Posterior, who commanded the 1st and 2nd centuries respectively; the Princeps Prior and the Princeps Posterior, who commanded the 3rd and 4th centuries; the Hastatus Prior and the Hastatus Posterior commanded the 5th and 6th centuries. Between cohorts, the officers of the 1st cohort were the most senior, while those of the 10th cohort were the most junior. It should be noted that the prestige of the 1st cohort centurions was recognized in that its 5 officers were known as the Primi Ordines, the most senior of which was the Primus Pilus, or First Spear. This was a highly coveted post, typically lasting only a single year, and would be the crowning achievement of a long career in the army. Over time, as the legions settled down into fixed positions, the role of Primus Pilus would evolve to become more administrative. But beyond these career centurions, most legions were commanded by non-professional legates, selected from the senatorial class. Some exceptions did exist, such as the Legio Duo Traiana, which was commanded by an equestrian prefect. Whatever the case, the legate, or prefect, would have 6 tribunes serving directly beneath them. In the Republican period, these have also been non-professionals drawn from the political elite, but during the Principate, the 5 tribuni angusticlavi, or the narrow stripe tribunes, could also be promoted up from the centurion ranks. In contrast, the singular tribunus laticlavius, or broad stripe tribune, was typically still a young man of the senatorial class who only served with the legion for a year before returning to his political career. Together, these tribunes provided important tactical command of a legion during wartime, whilst otherwise acting as administrators. Let's now take a moment to step back and appreciate the real size of the legions in its various forms. We can begin with a hypothetical parade rest of the entire force and its gear. Together, they cover 25 square kilometers and number about 9,000. Of all the beings within this area, 80% are humans and 20% are animals. Among the people, 73% are infantry or cavalry, 4.5% are officers, 0.5% are specialists, and 22% are military slaves. But this sort of deployment is quite ahistoric. More commonly, you would find a legion in their camp, on the march, or in battle. Let's take a look at the true size of each of these. One of the most typical places to find a legion would be its home base, the Castra Legionaria. These permanent positions—
Wow, they had permanent camps. Okay, these permanent camps housed the bureaucratic elements of the legion. When attacked, the legions preferred to march out and counterattack rather than hold their fortified positions. That's just typical Roman. They're not going to just hold back. Okay.
had begun to be established during the reign of Augustus as a means to begin fortifying the empire's various frontiers. But while they did boast moats, walls, and towers, they were not intended to serve as impregnable military hardpoints. Rather, their purpose was to serve as the staging point for offensive action.
Okay. The Roman military was typically garrisoned aggressively and was used to project power rather than protect land.
They were a place for the legions to muster, gather supplies, and oversee their area of operations. As such, these bases were well equipped with facilities ranging from administrative buildings to barracks, hospitals, granaries, armories, and more. Overall, their arrangement was quite regular, but with dimensions which stretched as needed. For our example, we assume a fort measuring about 400.
Okay, the fortress shown here is based on the Caerleon fortress, which was actually measured at 57 m by 400 m. Okay.
70 by 470 meters. For perspective, this is 220,000 square meters, or about 55 acres.
Dang.
Which is the rough equivalent of 23 soccer fields.
Yeah, at this point, just make towns, like military towns, you know? I mean, definitely, that's really cool, the fortress, and yeah, like, I kind of get, like, town vibes. I think that's why I made the remark there, but that's really cool to see that they were, like, stationed around, like, I don't know, gives me, like, city vibes, you know?
On our records, it was actually quite rare for a legion to be at its base all at once.
Okay, legionaries were detached to serve as policemen, construction workers, engineers, craftsmen, and administrators. That's another cool aspect about the legionary. Like, we think definitely of the soldier aspect, but they could do it all. They were engineers, you know, policemen. The legion was flexible in its thing, and it could do various, like, activities and stuff, which I think is really cool. It helped in their efficiency, you know what I mean? So yeah, and I'm at least aware because Julius Caesar did love his construction engineering, and obviously we just have his engineers constantly just engineering crap, so that kind of was my introduction to the idea of the legionary being more than just the fighting soldier. They could do a lot more and can be used for a lot more.
Once. Much of the time, soldiers would have been dispersed on leave, on watch duty, or on all manner of other missions. Only for major campaigns would an entire legion be assembled, and when the time came, they would march out for war. This would have been done in a disciplined manner. Generally speaking, a legion deployed in the following order: the scouts, the vanguard, the officers, the main legionary body, the impedimenta or baggage train, and the rear guard.
Holy crap. Oh my gosh, it keeps going.
There are many nuances we could get into, but this description will have to suffice for now.
Oh my gosh. Dude. That line of the legionary is so... Yeah, it's so, like, long. That's what she said. But, like, look at that. Like, imagine that, like, marching to you. Like, I'd be... like, you know, no wonder the Roman legion ruled the world for as long as it did. Holy crap.
For this depiction, we have modeled our previously described legion on the march with a maximum of 6 men abreast. This assumption is consistent with the widest of Roman roads, which measure around 6 meters across. In this arrangement, the entire column of about 7,200 men and 1,900 animals stretches out over 1.9 kilometers. At a walking speed of around 5 kilometers an hour, it would take 23 minutes for a single legion and its baggage train to pass. At a gallop, it would take a rider going 40 kilometers an hour about 3 minutes to ride across the entire length of the column.
Oh my gosh.
But this assumes quite idealized conditions. If roads were narrow and progress delayed for any reason, a single legion could easily double in length, stretching well over 3.8 kilometers, taking 45 minutes to pass, and requiring 6 minutes to ride from back to front.
Wow.
It's no wonder an army in such a formation was highly vulnerable whilst on the move.
Yeah, that's also another thing, huh? Like, I think of the Bulgarians and their constant jumping the Romans from the sides. It makes a lot more sense if this is how they were moving. I mean, granted, it's like Byzantine era more, but that's a bit later and things changed, but like, yeah, it does make sense that, like, when we have seen the Romans getting jump in their marches on the sides, how that would be effective. So that makes sense.
But assuming no attack took place, a legion would strike camp each night in its journey across the lands. In this way, it would slowly advance into enemy territory. When battle was eventually to be joined, a legion would now deploy for combat. While armies of the Republic tended to deploy in the standard triplex axes, those of the Empire were far more flexible. The exact manner in which legions might be deployed would depend on the situation and the preferences of their commander. Almost universally, however, they would still have honored the prudent idea of troops being deployed to the center, the wings, and most importantly, the reserves. For this example, we have assumed that in a vacuum, our single legion has adopted a Republican-style triple axis. Here, the 2,000 soldiers of cohorts 7 through 10 form the first line. The 1,500 soldiers of cohorts 4 through 6 form the second line. And the 1,900 soldiers of cohorts 1 through 3 with the cavalry form the third line to defend the rear and act as an emergency reaction force. Zooming in, I will note that most scholars agree that soldiers in a unit stood 1 meter side to side and 2 meters front to back. Assuming a typical sentry is arranged in 8 ranks of 10 men, it occupies a space of 16 by 13.5 meters. Additionally, if we assume that multiple sentries maintain 2 or 3 meters of separation side to side and 8.5 meters front to back, we are left with a total formation whose frontage is about 609 meters across and 138 meters deep. To contextualize this, we can state that it would take a soldier about 4.5 minutes to walk across the front and a rider about half a minute to make the same trip at a gallop. An archer with an upper bow range of 200 meters could only fire across 33% of the legion's frontage. For someone looking across this same distance, a human-sized figure on the other end would be quite difficult to discern.
Yeah, I bet.
The logistical implications of all this are certainly relevant to the experience of being on an ancient battlefield. And yet we must also keep in mind that the most important battles of the Roman era involved far more than a single legion, and that the entire empire at its height had at least 30. Thus, you must take all the figures we have shared in this video and multiply them many times.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like by like 30, holy crap. Was there ever a time where they were all in like near one place at one time? Because just seeing one of these things, like the scale is like, holy crap, I can't fight that. Imagine multiple of these things. Oh my gosh, like, you know, the Roman manpower, dude. My gosh. This definitely puts it into scale. Makes the Roman legionary more intimidating now that I'm seeing it in this light. You know, I'm just imagining myself looking at this, and I'm just like, oh no, like, how are we gonna deal with that? Like, oh my gosh, wow.
Over to even begin to wrap your head around the scales we are talking about.
Oh my gosh.
For now, though, I hope that this explanation has at least given you a basic understanding of the subject and the value of putting such matters in their proper spatial context. Stay tuned for additional videos where we explore the true size of our past, and let us know.
Dang, dude. Size matters, guys, and this was a great video. I'm really happy to have seen this, because it just kind of blew my mind. Like, just seeing it, like, obviously we're aware of it. We talked a lot about Rome on this channel. We watch a lot of battles, like, with epic history and kings and generals. But it's cool to just see the scale of how things would have looked on ground, and just, like, puts into perspective, like, oh my goodness, you know? So overall, great video. I really loved it. Very enlightening. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow when we watch something new. Bye, everyone.